Religion and morality. What is the connection? Well, if you believe William Lane Craig, for example, who is a contemporary defender of Christianity, biblical Christianity as he puts it, you can't have morality at all unless you have these two key elements: God, the Abrahamic God for him, and immortality, that is presumably heaven and hell. You've got to have those, otherwise you don't have morality. Now, the question is, why is that true? Why do you have to have God and immortality, or religion in general, in order to have morality? Well, clearly for religious people, there's an obvious connection between religion and morality, and that is religion, as you know from looking at 4 major world religions. It's a key feature of religion that they provide a bunch of moral guidelines for their followers. Buddhism has all kinds of moral rules, and of course Judaism and Christianity have the 10 Commandments, and in Judaism actually there's a lot more than 10. There's hundreds, and you find a lot of them in what Christianity calls the Old Testament. And of course, there's the pillars of Islam that tell you things you have to do, as well as all kinds of moral rules there too. So, religions, it is certainly a key feature of religions that they tell you how you should live your life, and they give you rules that form a moral system. So certainly, they're a source of moral rules. But that's not what people like William Lane Craig mean, because you could get moral rules elsewhere. Although I find that this is sometimes news to believers. They think that it is sometimes thought that the only place that you find moral rules is in religious texts, within scriptures of some sort. And that's just not the case. Because, as Elizabeth Anderson points out, even the oldest of the 4 world religions that we looked at, Hinduism, it's, 3,000 years old at most? And in the history of humankind, that's, a tiny baby. Humans have existed for much, much, much longer than that. And theism, for example, is an even more recent development than Hinduism. So it seems odd to say this, because this seems to imply that there was no morality until very recently in human development. And that just doesn't seem to be true. Certainly if we think that you've got to have morality, otherwise societies would dissolve into chaos. And it does seem that morality is an important social necessity. That is, in order for people to get along in society without turning on each other, we need to have moral rules. That seems to be a key function of morality, is to make societies work so that humans can cooperate and they don't just tear each other apart. And societies succeeded pretty well before these theistic religions developed. So what's behind this idea that there's no morality without God and immortality? Well, one way of looking at the issue is to address the Euthyphro Dilemma. As this is mentioned in your readings, it's the Euthyphro is a dialogue of Plato's. And Plato, of course, the great ancient Greek philosopher, who was a student of Socrates, and Socrates never wrote anything down. So Plato's works are all in the form of dialogues that all feature a character of Socrates. And Socrates is usually, in most cases, presented as the protagonist or the main feature, presenting a philosophy. In the Euthyphro, Socrates is interested in what piety demands, piety being the correct relationship with the gods. Gods plural, because this is ancient Greece, and they've got Zeus and those guys. And the reason why this comes up is because the other character, Euthyphro, is doing something that in Greek society was considered shocking. He's putting his own father on trial. Now, we would say for good reason, because his own father killed a servant. But the idea of putting your own father on trial for killing somebody so lowly as a servant would be seen as shocking in Greek culture. So Socrates says, wow, you must be really sure of yourself. You must have a really clear idea of what the gods demand. Now, in modern terms, this idea of piety is parsed as morality, because it's what you should do in simple terms. And Euthyphro, who's very full of himself, says, yes, I do have a good understanding of piety. And he says, Socrates says, well, what is piety? And one of the earliest definitions that Euthyphro gives is what the gods love. Now, at this point, Socrates asks a famous question that presents a choice between two possible relationships between, now this isn't the way that Socrates phrases it, because he talks about gods plural, but this is the modern equivalent. And so this is the question, and it gives us two options. Let's assume there's a relationship between God and morality. Okay, what kind of relationship? Here are your options. Does God command something, like thou shalt not kill or whatever, a particular moral rule that you say is commanded by God? Does God command that because that thing is right, or is that thing right because God commands it? Now, you have to think about this for a second to see the difference, but there is a very important difference. The second one is what is now called divine command theory. What that says is that a rule that is supposed to be commanded by God gets its moral authority simply from the fact that God commanded it. So let's say thou shalt not kill. Why shouldn't you kill? Because God says not to. So it's like, you know, remember when you're a kid and your parents tell you to do something and you say, why? Why do I have to do that? And then they say, because I said so. This is the divine command theory, except it's God saying it. Notice that there's nothing behind that. So the implication of this is if God had not commanded it, you wouldn't have to do it. There would be no moral obligation. So there's nothing intrinsic to that particular statement, that particular rule, that makes it right or wrong. The only thing that makes it right or wrong is God commanding it. So it's the force of God behind it. Now, if the divine command theory is correct, then that makes perfect sense of Craig's statement that you can't have morality without God, because God has to be there to make commands. Otherwise, nothing is right or wrong. That is, according to the divine command theory, to say something is right is simply to say that God commands it. To say something is wrong is simply to say that God forbids it. Without God there to command or forbid, there would be no rules. It's like a house full of toddlers and no parent. There would be chaos. There would be anarchy. There would be no rules. That's the divine command theory. Now, what do we think of this? Well, obviously, if you don't believe in God, you don't believe in this. But it's not just people who don't believe in God who are critical of the divine command theory. In fact, it's some of the greatest religious thinkers who think the divine command theory is not just mistaken, but it's blasphemous. Most famous of these critics is Saint Thomas Aquinas, widely regarded as the greatest Christian philosopher. Saint Thomas Aquinas says that, Well, I'm going to give you the general criticisms. Aquinas probably said most of them, and I'll give you one that's specific to him. But the main criticism of this, of the divine command theory, is that it makes God look arbitrary. What does it mean? What does arbitrary mean? It means acting for no reason, just doing things without having a reason for it. Why does the divine command theory make God look arbitrary? Because if something is right simply because God commands it, that means that there's nothing intrinsic to the rule that makes it right or wrong. It has no moral properties. It gets all of its moral properties from God commanding it. Then you ask, why did God command it? And the answer is, no reason. Because if there was a reason, if God commanded that we shouldn't kill because killing is intrinsically bad, then we're not the divine command theory anymore. We're the first option. God commanded it because it was right, because God saw that killing is wrong, so God says, hey, killing is wrong. So notice one way to think about the two options is, on the first option, God is like the perfect judge. That is, God understands all of the laws and is a very good person to consult if you want to know what the laws are. So the first option is like God as the perfect judge, whereas the second option is like God as the king. That is, the king makes the laws. Let's say it's a king who is both legislator and executive, doesn't have a parliament. That is, there are no laws unless the king makes them. Why does the king make them? Doesn't have to have a reason. And in fact, if you're fully committed to the divine command theory, you have to say that God has no reason for making killing wrong. So notice an implication of the divine command theory is that if God said, thou shalt torture small babies to death, then that would be right. Because the only thing that creates moral value is God's commands. So whatever God's commands is right. And if God hasn't said anything about it, then it is neither right nor wrong. So you might say, if we, like cloning. Clearly, there's nothing in the Bible about cloning because nobody knew the possibility of cloning. Although presumably, if the Bible was the revealed word of God, then there should be stuff about cloning because God knows that cloning is coming up in a few thousand years and he's laying down the rules for all time, so he should say stuff about cloning. So it's a little interesting that there are no rules in the Bible about stuff that would happen in the future. But anyway, there's no rules in the Bible about cloning. Well, according to the divine command theory, and if God has not yet issued an edict against cloning, it's neither right nor wrong. It's only when God says something about it that it acquires moral properties. Now, that makes God seem arbitrary because God has no reason to pick the rules that he picks. He could pick anything. Secondly, a second criticism of this, and this is again Aquinas has this criticism. The notion of divine command theory makes nonsense of the idea that God is good. Now, why do we say that God is good? God is good, we say, because there is a standard of goodness. Let me make a comparison. How do I know that this is, 6 inches long? Answer, because I have a ruler that I can measure it against. So the only way I can ascribe a length to this object is if I have an independent scale against which I can compare it. Compare that with God, or compare that with anything. When you say something is good, that means in order to say that, you have to have a scale against which to measure it. You have to have a goodness scale. So if I say, Joe is a good person, I would have to point to some features of Joe, and I would have to say, and according to my scale of goodness, if you help people out without being asked, you don't lie, that kind of thing, that makes you good on this scale of goodness. Okay, if we're going to say that God is good, and of course we do, then there has to be a scale against which we're measuring God. And according to that, of course, he's off the scale because he's perfect, but there has to be an independent scale. Whereas according to the divine command theory, God is the source of the scale. So it's like saying God is good because God says so. But that doesn't make God good. That means that there is no independent scale according to which God is good. Think of it this way. The divine command theory says it's impossible for God to do wrong because whatever God does is, in a sense, commanded by God, so that makes it right. But that's kind of cheating. That's like saying, that's making it true by definition. And if things are true by definition, that's kind of an empty truth. That isn't a truth that we can discover. So that's the reason, that's another reason that Aquinas rejects this, that it makes the idea of God being good empty. It's just saying that God is as God is. But we want to say that we can see that God is good. Not simply that God is God, but that God is good, because there is some objective scale according to which we can measure it, which is what this requires. So God commands X because it is right. There is an independent standard of rightness, and there's an independent standard of goodness. According to the independent standard of goodness, we can see that God is good, and according to the independent standard of rightness, we can see that the commands of God meet that standard. So, Socrates, obviously, the implication of Socrates is that this is the only option you can have. In the Euthyphro Dilemma, he says, he puts it this way. If you define what is right, Euthyphro is essentially giving a version of the divine command theory when he says piety is what is loved by the gods. This is like saying morality is what God commands. But what Socrates argues for in that is that no, morality or piety is a feature of a thing that it has intrinsically. It is, and that is why God commands it. God sees that certain commands have this feature of being right, like you shouldn't torture babies. God sees that you shouldn't torture babies, and that's why God, in his infinite wisdom, recognizes that that is the right thing to do, or things that you shouldn't do. And in fact, that's the third criticism that Aquinas has of the divine command theory, that it makes morality just a matter of whim on God's part, when in fact morality should be a matter of wisdom. That is, the rules of morality are important because they have built into them the wisdom of God. There's a reason that God chose those rules. And the reason is something that he recognized in his infinite wisdom. Whereas divine command theory says there's no reason he chose them. It's just his whim. He could have chosen any other rules. So in general, that's a pretty serious criticism. And since Aquinas, it's been a lot harder to defend the divine command theory. Clearly, William Lane Craig hasn't got that bulletin, because what he's saying, in order to be true, depends on something like the divine command theory. Now, what is Aquinas' theory? Aquinas' theory is natural law theory. And there's a Aquinas' natural law theory is built in to Catholicism. And you're probably familiar that there's a lot of things that Catholicism in particular is committed to that not all versions of Christianity are committed to. So, for example, famously, Catholics are not supposed to practice birth control. Obviously, a lot of Christians are opposed to abortion, and Catholics are certainly opposed to abortion, but Catholics are even opposed to using birth control. And furthermore, to give another analogy, another example from sexuality, you're not supposed to masturbate, according to Catholicism. Well, why not? And the answer is because of natural law theory, which, as I said, St. Thomas Aquinas is regarded as the greatest Christian philosopher, and his rules are essentially built into Catholicism to a large degree. So, Catholic teaching is very much informed by natural law theory. So what does natural law theory suggest? Well, there are three parts to the theory. First part, the world is conceived to have a rational order. There's a reason for everything. Remember, that's part of the reason that Aquinas rejected the divine command theory, because it didn't reflect God's wisdom enough. But there's a rational order with values and purposes built into its nature. So everything has a reason the way why it is. I mean, we talk like this naturally anyway. So, for example, we say, why do giraffes have long necks? So they can reach the leaves. So that's implying that the reason there is a feature of nature, the long neck of the giraffe, is to achieve some purpose. So there's sort of purposes built into nature. Now, it is certainly true. What's interesting about Aquinas is that he was incredibly influenced by the philosopher Aristotle, who was actually Plato's student, and of course another pre-Christian thinker. So Aristotle is not a theist in the slightest. Aristotle would be regarded as a pagan, but actually Aristotle's theory gets incorporated into Thomistic thought, that is the thinking of St. Thomas Aquinas. So this idea that nature comes with purposes imbued in it is not taken from Christianity. It's not taken from the idea that God made the world, so therefore it has his purposes built into it. It's taken from Aristotle, who didn't believe in a creator God. So he thought that the world came with purposes built into it just anyway, not because they were put there by God. But anyway, certainly natural law theory says that. The world is conceived to have a rational order with values and purpose built into it. That's the first part. Second part, the laws of nature don't just describe how things are. So, the laws of nature are like what goes up must come down is a crude version of the law of gravity. That's just a description of how the world works. Not just that, though. They specify how the world ought to be. So things should be a certain way. Not just things are a certain way, things should be a certain way. So this means that we can draw moral lessons from the way the world is. So, and notice, you can see this. This certainly comes up in criticisms of certain sexual practices. So, for example, Catholic teaching on homosexuality has for the longest time been that it is wrong because it is unnatural. Now, why is it unnatural? Because it's sexual activity that, by definition, cannot lead to procreation. Well, so what? Well, says natural law theory, the point of sex is to produce babies. That's what sex is for, so that's what it should be for. So you can see there are moral lessons, not just, sex results in procreation, some of the time, but doesn't have to all of the time. No, that's the purpose of sexual activity. So that's what it should be for. And if you don't use it for that, if you have sex for pleasure or for some other reason that doesn't lead to procreation, that's immoral. That's an obvious implication of natural law theory. And then the third feature is that moral judgments are dictates of reason. This means that morality is independent of religion. That is, you can work out what the moral laws are from studying nature without having to rely on God telling you them. You can work them out yourself because God has sort of built them into nature. So just by studying nature, you can work out the rules. You don't have to go to Scripture or get direct word from God. So in a sense, natural law theory kind of cuts God out of the picture. Now, God is in the picture because the idea is that God put the lessons into nature in the first place, but you don't have to consult God. You just look at nature using your reason. And of course, as I said, this moral theory is very similar to Aristotle's, and Aristotle didn't actually believe in God. Aristotle said we can work out morality by looking at the world and working out what's the function of human beings. What's the function of human beings? Well, in order to work out the function of anything, you look at what's special about human beings. So for example, if I found a knife and I'd never seen one, I could work out what it was for by seeing, oh, it's got this sharp edge. That's what's special about it. That must be its function, something involving its special feature of a sharp edge. Well, what's the special feature of humans? It's our reason. That's what differentiates us from other animals. So clearly morality involves use of reason. This is an idea taken up by Aquinas. Okay, what to say about natural law theory? Well, a lot of the implications seem a little silly. I mean, certainly if you don't believe there's anything wrong with masturbation or homosexuality, you say, sure, sex can result in procreation, and in fact, probably that's its main function insofar as anything have a function. But that doesn't mean we can't have sex for other reasons. And clearly, you know, sex is pleasurable. That's built into nature. Otherwise, people wouldn't have as much sex as they do. So, you know, maybe that's the function, is to be pleasurable. And there are some weird implications of the interpretation of natural law theory. So, for example, if you're infertile, does that mean that if you have sex, it's immoral? Because by definition, it cannot lead to reproduction. Or, you know, so if you have, like if a woman has ovarian cancer and has a hysterectomy, does that mean, whoop, no more sex for you because you don't have the tools to reproduce anymore? That seems needlessly cruel and doesn't seem like something that we should follow. And, you know, okay, that's an easy example. It's easy to see that our sexual organs are for reproduction. But what's the rest of us for? You know, are we allowed to get a pierced ear, or is that misusing the function of our earlobes? Can you get a pierced nose? You know, what's the tongue for? Is that the tongue seems to be for many things. It's for tasting, it's for licking, it's for talking. You know, are we only allowed to use one of them, or can you have multiple functions? Well, if you're allowed multiple functions, then, you know, maybe multiple functions of our genitals, and we're allowed to use them for anything else we want. So you either assume that there's one function and it's obvious, or it doesn't seem like there's any one particular moral rule that we can learn from nature. And of course, there are other problems like nature. There's homosexuality in nature. There's murder in nature. There's incest in nature. These are all natural. These happen in the animal kingdom. Are we supposed to say that therefore they're okay? Or if we're supposed to say some of the things that happen in nature are good, some of the things that happen in nature are bad, well then it seems like natural has nothing to do with morality, because we're judging different kinds of natural things. Some are immoral and some are not. So it's obviously not nature that is our source of a moral standard. That's the problem with natural law theory. So natural law theory, which is a distinctive form of of moral theory that doesn't require God's commands, we've seen that there's problems with it, that it just seems arbitrary in many respects. But it's just one possible theory, and it is a theory that involves God without being the divine command theory. So that's why it's worth discussing. Although probably defenders of the divine command theory would point out, well, it doesn't really require God because, as I said, it's very similar to Aristotle's theory, and Aristotle's theory doesn't involve God at all. It does involve the idea that there are functions in nature, which is an idea that has been discarded in particular because of the theory of evolution by natural selection. I don't need to get into that right now. Actually, it came up in the argument from design discussion. But there are many other moral theories that do not involve God. Aristotle's is regarded as one of the greatest. In modern terms, there are two major camps of secular moral theory. If you take an ethics class, you will absolutely 100% have to study both of them. One is Immanuel Kant's deontological theory, involving something called the categorical imperative, where, according to him, morality is a system of rules that are absolute and must be followed, cannot be broken. Alternatively, there's what's called consequentialist theory. The most famous example of this is utilitarianism. It's called consequentialist because it says the rightness or wrongness of any action is a function of its consequences. So an action is right if it leads to good consequences, it's wrong if it leads to bad consequences. And what's distinctive about utilitarianism is that the goodness or badness of the consequences is measured in terms of how much happiness they produce. And notice that this is, the idea behind this is you look first at what is of intrinsic value in the world. And Jeremy Bentham, who is the modern inventor of utilitarianism, although it has ancient roots too, a contemporary of Aristotle called Epicurus is widely seen as the sort of progenitor of utilitarianism. He's the one actually who came up with the problem of evil, so he's a big figure. But anyway, utilitarianism says an action is right insofar as it maximizes happiness. Why? Because happiness is obviously good. It's good in itself. What's the one thing, if you were abandoned on a desert island, so many things that you valued now would be no use to you because they're only intrinsic goods. Money would be no use to you. The only reason you value it now is because it can get you good stuff. But we need to know what is something that is good in itself. Happiness. Even if you're on a desert island, you want happiness, even if you don't want money, because happiness is good in itself. So morality must be a system of maximizing happiness, and it must be maximizing general happiness. It's not selfish, it's the good for all. So that's the basic idea behind utilitarianism. And notice, no God involved there at all. So if you take this option, you don't need God, because morality is independent of God. Sure, God is a helpful guide to what is right, because God can see, God is omniscient. God knows what is good. But God doesn't make what is good and right good and right. It just is by its nature. And so there are any number of secular moral theories. Something that Craig doesn't seem to know, because he says, he presents a bunch of what I would say are obvious false dilemmas. He says either you've got God or you've got nothing. There is no possibility of morality. And that's just, take an ethics class, dude. There's a million ethical theories. Anyway, so you can see why, if you're committed to the role of God in morality, the divine command theory is your only option, because the natural law theory doesn't really seem to require God, besides its other problems. All right, so divine command theory. what's the problem? What are some problems with the divine command theory besides the criticisms that come that we already seen from Aquinas? Well, Elizabeth Anderson lists a bunch of the commands that we find in the Bible, Old Testament and New, that seem to, they're not just God doing bad things. Because if they're God doing bad things, then divine command theory says, well, because God is doing them, they're not bad. Which, if I must say, when I read some of the stories in the Old Testament, I am rather appalled. And I'm not alone in this. We know that the three theistic religions that we talk about a lot, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are all called the Abrahamic faiths because they regard Abraham as their progenitor. Now, what's the most famous story about Abraham that every believer should know? It's the story of Abraham and Isaac, or on the Muslim version, Abraham and Ishmael. But basically, Abraham is incredibly old. Abraham and his wife Sarah are, hundreds of years old, and they've given up hope of having a child. But then they have a miracle child. Okay, so they have a child very late in life. So they value this child more than anybody values their child. And God commands Abraham to sacrifice, in the Christian version and Jewish version, Isaac, sacrifice him. And Abraham says, okay, and he takes, but he doesn't tell Sarah because he knows she'll be pretty pissed. I'm off to sacrifice our miracle child, love. I'll be back by lunchtime. He doesn't say that. He says, I'm just going for a walk. And he doesn't tell Isaac that he's going to sacrifice him because he clearly knows neither of them are going to be okay with this. So he just says, come on, Isaac, we're going off for a walk. And they walk up a mountain. And he gets Isaac to gather sticks that are essentially going to be the fire that he gets burnt on, but he doesn't tell him this. And then he ties him up, and he's about to stab him when, in the story, God says, kidding, I was just joking, you don't have to do it, but, I do need you to sacrifice something, so sacrifice that ram over there, because Old Testament God likes his sacrifices. Apparently, he's not so big on them anymore, fortunately, but back then he really liked blood sacrifices. So that story, I don't think makes God look good. It makes God look like he's kind of messing with you. And even worse is the story of Job, which, as you probably know, there's sort of a bet between God and Satan whether or not Job can be give up his faith. So God allows Satan to destroy Job's life, including killing all his family, just to test him. Now, he gives it him back at the end, but he's tortured him, essentially, the worst kind of torture imaginable. And then he says, you get it back. Sorry about that. But, you'll be rewarded for this test of faith. Those kind of stories don't make me look on God as perfect, I gotta say. And I don't think I'm alone in this. And the trouble with divine command theory is it says things are right insofar as they're commanded by God. But he commands, how do we know what he commands? We can't use reason to work out his commands because that would be the alternative to the divine command theory. We can't say, let us work out what God would say. No. You can't do that because you don't know what God would say. God isn't using reason for his commands. They have no moral value either way until he commands them. The only way to know what morality is, according to this, is to know exactly what it is that God has commanded. Where do you go to find that out? Presumably Scripture. What do we find in Scripture? God commanding all sorts of horrendous things. This was illustrated kind of humorously a few years ago. I don't know if this person is still on the air, But there was a minor controversy about a radio host called Laura Schlesinger. She dispenses advice to people who call into a radio show, and she was a convert to Judaism, and she made some statements about homosexuals. Basically, she says homosexuality is wrong because God says it's wrong. And circulating on the early days of the internet, so that's a while ago, was this open letter to Dr. Laura. It goes like this. Dear Dr. Laura, thank you for doing so much to educate people regarding God's law. I have learned a great deal from your show, and I try to share that knowledge with as many people as I can. When someone tries to defend the homosexual lifestyle, for example, I simply remind him that Leviticus 18:22 clearly states that it is an abomination, end of debate. I do need some advice for you, however, regarding some of the specific laws and how to best follow them. A. When I burn a bull on the altar as sacrifice, I know it creates a pleasing odor for the Lord, Leviticus 1:9. The problem is my neighbors. They claim the odor is not pleasing to them. Should I smite them? B. I would like to sell my daughter into slavery, as sanctioned in Exodus 21:7. In this day and age, what do you think would be a fair price for her? C. I know that I am allowed no contact with a woman when she is in her period of menstrual uncleanliness, Leviticus 15:19-24. The problem is, how do I tell? I've tried asking, but most women take offense. D. Leviticus 25:44 states that I may indeed possess slaves, both male and female, provided they are purchased from neighboring nations. A friend of mine claims that this applies to Mexicans, but not Canadians. Can you clarify? Why can't I own Canadians? E. I have a neighbor who insists on working on the Sabbath, Exodus 35:2. Clearly states that he should be put to death. Am I morally obligated to kill him myself? F. A friend of mine feels that even though eating shellfish is an abomination, Leviticus 11:10, it is a lesser abomination than homosexuality. I don't agree. Can you settle this? It goes on. I know from Leviticus 11:6-8 that touching the skin of a dead pig makes me unclean. But may I still play football if I wear gloves? And it goes on. I know you have studied these things extensively, so I'm confident you can help. Thank you again for reminding us that God's word is eternal and unchanging. You see the point that is being made. The point that is being made is, look, if divine command theory is right, you've got to obey all of God's commands. They're on an equal par because God has commanded all of them. If you actually read the Bible, God commands all kinds of things. Like Leviticus is the number one book that people who are opposed to homosexuality cite to say that it's wrong, because it says, thou shalt not lie with a man as with a woman, this is an abomination, or something like that. But in that very same book, Leviticus, it says other things that it calls the same thing, abomination, eating shellfish. So eating shellfish is as bad as homosexuality, according to Leviticus. Where are the people picketing Red Lobster? Why aren't they burning it down as a source of hellfire and damnation? Also, you're not allowed to sow two kinds of seed in the same furrow. That's an abomination. You're not allowed to wear garments that are made of two different kinds of fiber. If you've got a cotton polyester blend shirt, abomination. Nobody pays any attention to those. Why not? If you believe divine command theory, and if your source for saying that homosexuality is wrong is Leviticus, you've got to be opposed to those. You cannot eat shellfish. Now you might say, but God doesn't mean that anymore. Well, how do you know? What's your reason for saying that we can eat shellfish now? God, as it says at the end, thanks for reminding us that God's law is eternal and unchanging. Presumably you are saying, well, they only said that at the time because those were like dietary restrictions of the culture in which Leviticus was written. Well, guess what? You can say the same about homosexuality, so stop citing it at all. But also, who are you to say that? These people are saying they got it directly from God. Are you questioning now that they got it directly from God? And this is something that, of course, Elizabeth Anderson picks up on and says, look, what is the evidence that we have for theism? And it is, she says, Scripture and miracles. These are this is on page 3. What then is the evidence for theism? It is Scripture, plus any historical or contemporary evidence of the same kind as presented in Scripture, testimonies of miracles, revelations in dreams, or what people take to be direct encounters with God, experience of divine presence. Now, so what? Well, back to Craig. Craig says that there is no morality without God and immortality. Let's look at exactly what he says. In particular, in the reading that I gave you from William Lane Craig, he covers a bunch of things. So he doesn't just cover morality. He covers purpose to life, that your life will have no purpose unless there is God or immortality. Your life will have no meaning without God and immortality. But the section that we're particularly interested in is where he says no ultimate value without immortality. He says, if there is no God, then there can be no objective standards of right and wrong. All we are confronted with is, in Jean-Paul Sartre's words, the bare valueless fact of existence. Moral values are either just expressions of personal taste or the byproducts of socio-biological evolution and conditioning. In a world without God, who is to say which values are right and which are wrong? Who is to judge that the values of Adolf Hitler are inferior to those of a saint? The concept of morality loses all meaning in a universe without God. Again, he's suggesting, he mentions two widely rejected theories of morality. One is that morality is just personal opinion. That's called subjectivism. Nobody believes that. And then the idea that morality is just a byproduct of society. That leads to relativism because obviously different societies have different rules. So if you're a relativist, you say what is moral in one culture is not moral in another. Like it's immoral to commit adultery in one society, it's perfectly okay in another. So literally morality would change from place to place. And one thing that seems to be true of morality, at least according to the great moral theorists, is that it's objective. It doesn't change from place to place. Certain things can change from place to place, like standards of etiquette. What is polite is certainly culturally relative, but what is right doesn't change. Like if torture, for example, some oppressive regimes sometimes say, you West, stop imposing your ideas of universal human rights on us. You're just a cultural imperious. We don't have the idea of universal human rights. So stop telling us not to torture our political prisoners, because that's just the way we do things. That's obviously bullshit. If it's wrong to torture political prisoners in one place, it's wrong anywhere, and it doesn't matter if the majority says it's okay. So he's acting as if subjectivism and relativism are the only options if you don't believe in God. He's ignoring all of the great moral theories that you learn about in an ethics class. Aristotle's theory, Plato's theory, utilitarianism and Kantianism. All of these are not subjectivist, they're not culturally relativist, and they give us very sophisticated theories for explaining what makes things right and what makes things wrong, and they don't necessarily involve God. Certainly utilitarianism, Bentham was very much an atheist. So that's one problem. But then the flip side is, okay, what Craig is doing in this article is he's saying, unless you have these two things, you don't have morality. That's a negative argument. He says you've got to have these two. If you don't have these two, then you don't have morality. But what he doesn't go on to say is why having them gives you morality. This reminds me a little bit, this is an analogy. Do you know what Guinness is? Guinness is a stout beer, famously a product of Ireland, that's black with a very thick, creamy head. And believe it or not, in England, they used to give it to pregnant women free on the national health because it's a very good source of iron. But it's also a source of alcohol, which you probably should not be drinking when you're pregnant, so they don't do that anymore. But anyway, it's one of the most famous products of Ireland. It is known the world over. And it used to have a famous advertising campaign called that said, "Guinness is good for you." It isn't good for you. It does have iron in it, but it's also beer, so it's fattening and it contains alcohol. So eventually the Advertising Standards Committee says, you can't actually say that anymore. Ingeniously, in my lifetime, they flipped it around and they made up a word, ginless. In other words, going without Guinness. And they said, ginless isn't good for you. And that's kind of what we have here. He's saying ginless isn't good for you. He's saying not having God and morality isn't good for you. First of all, he doesn't really do a good job of demonstrating that because he doesn't consider the major secular moral theories. He just quotes a bunch of people who disagree with the major moral theories, like Jean-Paul Sartre rejects Kant and rejects utilitarianism. But, Kant and utilitarianism are more popular in secular philosophy than Sartre. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, we're left to assume that because ginless isn't good for you, there's sort of a hidden implication that Guinness is good for you, that God and immortality do give you morality. But of course, then you would have to rely on the divine command theory, and we've seen the issues with that. Now, what Anderson says is, what is Craig doing? Craig is arguing that you shouldn't be an atheist, essentially, because atheism has the implication that anything is permitted, as both of them cite Dostoevsky's quote. Dostoevsky's quote, if Craig has got it right, is without immortality, anything is permitted. Now, why do we need immortality? Presumably because there has to be a reckoning. And this comes up in the Craig article. If there is no heaven or hell, if there's no afterlife, then evil people get away with it. Stalin died in his bed. The cause of more deaths than any individual man in history. Is he or is Pol Pot worse? I can't remember. But anyway, Stalin caused the death of millions directly by his orders, and he died in his bed. Nobody got to him. They didn't kill him and hang him upside down by his feet like they did with Mussolini and Nicolae Ceausescu. He just died. He escaped, as it were. That is intolerable, says Craig, unless you believe that Stalin is now in hell, that he's getting his punishment. You have to believe in immortality to believe that the scales of justice are balanced. Otherwise, the world is a shitty, unjust place. Bad people get away with it. Good people suffer for no reason. He says that's intolerable. Nobody can live with that. The quote is from Dostoevsky, without immortality, nothing is permitted, but it's usually quoted as without God, everything is permitted. Now, so Anderson says, Craig's argument is the moralistic argument. If atheism implied everything is permitted, then that's a reason to reject atheism. Now she says, okay, good argument, except wrong target. She says, actually, it's theism that this works on, because theism implies everything is permitted, because theism says whatever God commands is right, and if you read the Bible, God commands all of these horrendous things, like murdering pregnant women and ripping their unborn children out of them. God commands that. God commands things like that all over the Old Testament. And the New Testament too. As she says, Jesus tells us his mission is to make family members hate one another so that they shall love him more than they kin. This is in Matthew 10:35-37. He promises salvation to those who abandon their wives and children for him, Matthew 19:29. The rod is not enough for children who curse their parents. They must be killed, Matthew 15:4-7. And, of course, the New Testament includes the book of Revelations, and all kinds of horrible things are prophesied there for what will happen to unbelievers. Death is not bad enough for unbelievers. They must be tortured first. Locusts will sting them like scorpions until they want to die, but they will be denied the relief of death. All of these things are permitted according to theism. So according to the moralistic argument, we should reject theism because it's obviously not true that these things are okay. What is Craig saying? Craig is saying atheism must be wrong because it says Hitler is as good as a saint. Because whatever Hitler did is wrong. And that's obviously false, Craig is saying. It's obviously false that Hitler is as good as a saint. So any theory that implies Hitler is as good as a saint must be false, and Craig says that's atheism. Now, if you believe in secular moral theories, as Elizabeth Anderson does, for example, she says the way the best explanation of ethics is to look at how it makes societies work, that ethics is a system of what people owe to each other. If you've watched a show called The Good Place, they actually cite the ethical theory of a contemporary living philosopher called Thomas Scanlon, who Elizabeth Anderson would have known. Elizabeth Anderson went to Harvard. Thomas, who for some reason everybody calls Tim, Thomas Scanlon taught there. She would have been familiar with it. And he has what's called a contractualist theory of morality. And his famous book, which they waved around in The Good Place, is called What We Owe to Each Other. And that's a good way of summarizing what morality is. Morality is a system of sort of compromises. You must be good to other people. It's kind of the golden rule. And the golden rule predates theism. It is found in just about every ancient culture that we can find. It's not something that Jesus invented. It predates Jesus and it postdates Jesus, the golden rule. And that's sort of at the core of any successful morality. Because obviously societies have to survive, and for them to survive, people have to cooperate. And this is a theory of how morality, of why certain things are morally true. So she says, actually, secular moral theories does not have the implication that everything is permitted. The thing that does is divine command theory, because divine command theory, your only way of knowing what God commands is either hearing it from God directly, and even, of course, if you do, you could be insane, because after all, the son of Sam thought that God was talking to him when he told him to kill people. And we think, no, he wasn't. He was insane. He was hearing voices. So even if you do hear voices, you don't even know they're for God. And as she cites here, according to Kant, if the voice that you hear is commanding you to do something immoral, then it's not God, which is like the moralistic argument. Whereas secular morality doesn't have this implication. The morality, divine command theory does.